release today. 2020 was an extraordinary year, and the whole world is paying a lot of attention to China's economic performance in 2020. Today, we have the honor to have with us the head of National Bureau of Statistics, Mr. Ning Jizhe, to give a briefing on China's economic performance in 2020, and we'll also answer your questions. Now let's give the floor to Minister Ning. Dear friends from the media, good morning. Let me introduce to you the China's economy in 2020. In 2020, facing difficult challenges brought by the COVID-19 under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee with President Xi Jinping at the core, governments at different levels worked vigorously to coordinate economic development and epidemic prevention. We implemented the tasks of 6 stabilizations and 6 guarantees. Social and economic development has registered a very positive result. Our GDP reached 101.59 trillion RMB, up by 2.3% year-on-year. The first quarter dropped by 6.8%. The second quarter saw an increase of 2.3%. The third quarter saw an increase of 4.9%. If we look by sectors,
7.7754万亿元，比上年增长3%。第二产业增加值38.4255万亿元，增长2.6%。第三产业增加值55.3977万亿元，增长2.1%。粮食产量再创新高，生猪生产持续较快恢复。全年全国粮食总产量66949万吨，比上年增长0.9%，增产565万吨。其中，夏粮产量14286万吨，增长0.9%。
Summer reached
早稻产量
14,288
万吨，增长
tons, up by 2.9%, and in autumn, it reached 493 million tons, and it increased by 9.4%. If we look by sectors, rice increased by 4.1%, wheat increased by 0.5%, soybeans increased by 8.3%. Throughout the year, meat production reached 76.39 million tons, slightly dropped against the previous year. If you look by specific sectors, chicken meat and eggs increased by 3.8% and 4.8% respectively. Pork production reduced by 3.3%. In the end of 2020, inventory pork and pigs increased by 3.1% and 5.1% respectively against the previous year. Technology registered a significant increase over the year. The added value of enterprises above designated prices increased by 2.8%. State-owned enterprises registered an increase of 2.2%. Stock companies increased by 3%. Foreign invested companies increased by 2.4%. Private enterprises increased by 3.7%. If we look by the industries, in the mining industry, it increased by 0.5%. Manufacturing increased by 3.4%. Utility services increased by 2%. High-tech manufacturing and equipment manufacturing had a added value that is 7.1% and 6.6% higher than the previous year, which expanded by 4.3 and 3.8% against enterprises above designated sizes. If we look by specific products, industrial robots and industrial computers registered an increase of 19.1%, 19.3%, and 12.7% respectively. In the fourth quarter, the added value of enterprises above designated sizes increased by 7.1%. This expanded by 1.3% against the third quarter. In December, enterprises above designated sizes increased by 7.3%, 0.03% larger than the previous month. In 2020, the industrial capacity utilization rate reached 74.5%. In the fourth quarter, the industrial utilization rate of the country reached 70.8%, 1.3% larger than the previous quarter. From January to November, total profit reached by enterprises above designated sizes reached 5.7 trillion RMB. In November, the total profit of these enterprises increased by 15.5%. For 6 consecutive months, it has maintained a double-digit growth. Number 3, trading services has stabilized, and modern services trade has maintained a positive growth. The overall volume of trading services has maintained basically the same level as the previous year. And in industrial sectors and service sectors, and it's increased by 9.7% and 7% respectively. And these are 4.9% higher than the growth of the tertiary industry. In the fourth quarter, the service sector increased by 7.7%, which is 3.4% wider than the third quarter. And in the third quarter, it registered an increase of 7.7%. From the first to the third quarter, trading services increased by 1.6%. High-tech services registered a revenue that is 13.5 and 9.5% larger, respectively. And this is wider than the increase of other sectors. In November, the business activity parameter reached 51.3%. So, in general, the service sector activity parameter is expected to be 60.1%, which is relatively a high level. Domestic consumption has also accelerated throughout the year. Total revenue of consumer goods dropped by only 3.9% against the previous year. Total retails reached 14 trillion RMB, down by 1.9%. If we look by regions in urban areas, it reached 3.9 trillion RMB, and it's down by 3.4%. And in the countryside, it reached 4 trillion yuan, which was down by 3.2%. If we look by sectors, the restaurant business registered a drop of 1.6%. commodities and retail dropped by 2.3%. If we look at the upgraded sector, it has actually accelerated in the fourth quarter. Telecommunications, cosmetics, jewelry have registered an increase of 20.6, 21.2, and 17.3% respectively, which is wider by 60.1% against the third quarter. In the fourth quarter, total social retails increased by 3.6%. In December, social retails increased by 4.6%. Throughout the year, total sales online reached 11.6 trillion RMB, and commodities sold online reached 9.7 trillion RMB, increased by 15.8%, and this accounts for 24.9% of the total social retails, which is 11 percentage points higher than the previous year. Number 5, fixed asset investment continued to increase. Throughout the year, fixed asset investment reached 51 trillion RMB, and this is 2.9% higher than the previous year. By sectors, the infrastructure increased by 0.9%, manufacturing investment dropped by 2.2%, real estate development increased by 7%. Total sales of housing reached 11.6 trillion square meters, and total revenue of house sales increased by 8.7%. Industrial investments have turned positive in all sectors, in which the first industry saw an increase of 11.5%, the second industry saw an increase of 2.1%, and the third industry saw an increase of 3.6%. Private investment amounted to 28.94 trillion RMB, and this is up by 1%. In the high-tech field, the investment increased by 10.6%, and this is 7.7% higher than the average of investments, in which high-tech industry and high-tech service saw an increase of 11.5% and 9.1% respectively. In high-tech manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, computers, office-related equipment saw an increase of 28.4% and 20.4% respectively. In high-tech manufacturing, electronic business and information service saw an increase of 20.2% and 15.2% respectively. In the social sector, investment increased by 11.9%, and this is a 9 percentage point higher than the average, in which health and education increased by 29.9% and 12.3% respectively. Number 6, foreign trade has turned positive. Trade structure has been constantly optimized. Throughout the year, total imports and exports of commodities amounted to 32.5 trillion RMB. Exports increased by 4% and imports dropped by 7%. And in general, we had maintained a surplus. Mechanic products for an increase of 6%, and general commodities accounted for 59.9% of the total foreign trade in China, and private sector accounted for 46.6% of the total foreign trade in China. In December, foreign trade increased by 5.9%, in which exports increased by 10.9% and imports dropped by 0.2%. But in general, we had maintained a surplus in December. Number 7, consumer price has slowed its momentum of growth, and PPI has dropped over the year. CPI increased by 2.5%, and this is slightly lower than 2.9%, which was registered in 2019, and it's also lower than the 3.5% expectation throughout the year, in which the urban areas increased by 3.2%, and in the countryside it's increased only by 2.2%. Alcoholic and cigarette products saw a CPI increase of 1.2%, and for housing it dropped by 0.4%. Social services and telecommunications and transportation dropped by 3.5%. Education and entertainment increased by 1.3%. Education and healthcare increased by 1.8%. Other services and commodities increased by 1.3%. In food, alcohol, and cigarettes, pork price increased by 49.7%, excluding the core CPI of food and energy. In general, this sector saw an increase of 1.8%. In December, CPI increased by 0.2%. But if we compare to the previous months, it's increased by 1.7%. Throughout the year, PPI dropped by 12.8%. Throughout the year, the purchase index of industries dropped by 2.3%, and in December, it basically equaled that level. Number 8, employment has maintained basically stable, and the surveyed unemployment rate reached the level of the same period last year. Throughout the year, new jobs created amounted to 11.86 million. We have basically reached the target we set at the beginning of the year by 131%, and unemployment surveyed in the urban area reached 5.2%, and this is the same level as the previous year. Between the age of 25 and 59, the surveyed unemployment rate is 4.7%, which is equivalent to the level of the previous year. And in the countryside, the unemployment rate is 5.6%, and this is lower than the 6.5 level expected. And in 22 large cities, the unemployment rate was 5.1%, and by the end of 2020, the registered unemployment rate is 4.24%, and this is lower than the expectation of 4.5%. We have altogether 280 million migrant workers from the countryside. This is an increase. This is a drop of 1.8%, and we have 160 million local migrant workers, which is a drop by 2.4%, and the average income of these migrant workers is 4,072 yuan, which is 0.8% higher than the previous year. Number 9, the income increase has basically maintained the same momentum with economic growth. Throughout the year, the average disposable income per capita is 32,189. In nominal forms, it increased by 1.8%, and this has basically maintained the same level with the economic growth. If we look by regions, in urban areas, the per capita income is 48,124, and in actual terms, it's an increase of 1.2%. In the countryside, the per capita income is 17,131, and this is an actual increase of 3.8% against the previous year. And the ratio between these two figures is 2.56. So this is narrowed by 0.08% against the previous year. The median figure of disposable income is 25,074, and this is an increase of 3.8%. In the low income group, the average income is 7,389, and in the medium and lower group, it's 8,000, and in the middle income group, it's a little bit over 20,000, and in the higher income group, it's 80,294. Throughout the year, the per capita consumption is 21,204, and this is a drop by 1.6%. Excluding price factors, the drop is 1.4% in the urban areas, and it's 20,000, and in the countryside, it's 13,000, and this is an increase of 2.9%. In general, in 2020, the national economy has basically stabilized, and we have made important progress in stabilizing people's income and livelihood, and we have scored basic victory in poverty alleviation, and we successfully ended and accomplished the target of the 13th five-year plan, and we expect to fully enter into a moderately well-off society. But we still face a lot of uncertainties. China's economic recovery is having unstable foundations going forward. We have to implement the Xi Jinping thoughts of socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era, implement the spirits of the 5th plenary session of the 19th CPC National Congress, and also the spirits reached by the National Economic Conference. We need to take a firm footing on the basis of new development concepts, create a new landscape for development, and constantly engage in reform and innovation, and consolidate our achievements of epidemic prevention and coordinate epidemic prevention with economic developments. We also need to further implement the tasks of 6 guarantees and 6 stabilizations to ensure that our economic performance can locate in a reasonable range, and therefore we could have a good beginning of the 14th five-year plan. Now the floor is open for questions. I'm with China Media Group. In 2020, faced with the coronavirus pandemic, after a drop of our GDP, it gradually stabilized and recovered. How do you comment the yearly economic performance in general? Thank you very much. This is a very important question. 2020 was an extraordinary year in the history of the People's Republic of China, confronting difficult challenges inside and outside, in particular, facing the serious challenges brought by the coronavirus pandemic under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee with Xi Jinping as the core. We have placed people's health and safety at the first place. We coordinated epidemic prevention and social and economic development. We also enhanced macro control measures and implemented the tasks of 6 stabilizations and 6 guarantees, and we have basically secured strategic results in our fight against the pandemic. In so doing, we have basically reached the targets that we set at the beginning of the year, and we have performed much better than we expected. The 13th five-year plan have ended successfully, and we expected to fully enter into a well-off society. And this can be reflected in the following areas. The first is that we have made important progress in coordinating economic development and epidemic prevention, with efforts from all sides. China was among the first to contain the spread of the pandemic. China was among the first to recover our economy and achieve a positive growth. In the end of March, we have basically curbed the domestic spread of the pandemic, and in April, we started to reopen our economy, and the reopening rate reached 90%, and in the second quarter, the GDP increased by 3.2%, and in the third quarter, 4.9%, and in the fourth quarter, 6.5%, and throughout the year, the GDP increased by 2.3%. We expect to become the first country amongst major economies to have registered a positive economic growth. And bear in mind, there are 18 major economies in the world, and right now, most countries haven't released their economic performance figures, and so we expect to be the first and only country to have registered a positive economic growth. In 2020, our GDP reached 101.6 trillion yuan, and we have reached the threshold of 100 trillion RMB. So this is also very important. And number two, we have secured important victory against poverty. And all the residents living in the countryside have alleviated from poverty against the existing standard. In poverty-stricken areas, the income of farmers also increased dramatically. Guangxi, Sichuan, Guizhou, Yunnan, Gansu, and Ningxia and Xinjiang autonomous regions. In these 7 provinces, the income of the farmers registered an increase that is 0.2% to 1.7% higher than the national average. Number 3, we have made important progress in macro control measures. Economic growth parameters reached to a normal range, and in the fourth quarter, the GDP increased by 6.5%, and this is even higher than the previous year. And the added value of enterprises above designated sizes increased by 7.1%. And throughout the year, we have basically achieved the targets of stabilizing prices and improving people's incomes. And the total new jobs created reached 11.86 million, and this is higher than the target that we set at the beginning of the year, and the unemployment rate was 5.2%, and this is slightly lower than expected, and CPI increased by 2.5%, and this is lower than the 3.5% target. The income increase has basically maintained the same level with social and economic growth, and in 2020, the average increase of people's income reached 2.1%, and this is basically the same level as our GDP growth. By the end of 2020, foreign capital reserves reached 3.275 trillion dollars. This is 100.6 billion dollars more than the previous year. So you can see that we have basically reached all the major targets set by the government work reforms at the beginning of the year. And number 6, 6 stabilizations and 6 guarantees have shown very positive results. For people aging between 25 and 59, the surveyed unemployment rate is in urban areas is 4.7%. In 2020, the net income of the population reached by 2.1%, and this shows how successful our efforts are. And the market has also resumed its vitality from January to December. The added value of enterprises increased by 2.4%, and the green output also registered a positive growth. In 2020, total production of grain output reached more than 1 trillion tons, 1 trillion kilos, and so the economic and production chains have continued to expand. And if we look by 41 categories, 25 categories of them have registered increase by an average of 5 percentage points. And the operation at the grassroots level has been maintained very stable from January to November. Budgets related to social security, housing have increased by 9.8%, 9.5%, and 9.2% respectively. So this is related to the stabilization of people's livelihood. Number 5, reform and opening up have brought about satisfactory results. And in November, the profit of enterprises above designated sizes have maintained an increase of double digits. From January to November, the profits of enterprises above designated sizes increased by 4.3%. For private enterprises, their profit increased by 1.8%. And bear in mind, in the first 3 quarters, we registered a drop of 0.5%. Supply-side reform has further deepened in the fourth quarter. The industrial capacity utilization rate reached 70.8%, and this is 1.3 percentage point higher than the third quarter, and this is the highest level since 2017. We also made important progress in streamlining administration and delegating powers. On a daily basis, we registered 12,000 new corporate entities. So this is faster than the average of the world. Food commodities have registered an increase of 14.8% of sales online, and foreign invested companies also saw an increase in this sector. And against the backdrop of a shrinking economy in 2020, total commodities imports and exports reached a new historic high, increased by 1.9% against the previous year. Number 6, important progress has been made in building a well-off society. Major targets of the 13th five-year plan have been achieved, and the GDP of the country exceeded 100 trillion RMB, and the per capita GDP exceeded $10,000, and the economic structure has been further optimized. We have completed major infrastructure projects. China's overall national strengths, including our strengths in technology and economy, have reached a new level, and we also reached important results in the 3 critical battles, in particular, poverty alleviation. More than 57 million residents living in the countryside have alleviated from poverty, and according to our surveys, 13.85 registered poverty families have alleviated out of poverty, and they have basic housing, healthcare support, and also livelihood support. In 2020, air quality increased dramatically, and The number of days where we have a clean sky reached 287, and the local government debt has been placed under effective control. People's livelihood has increased dramatically. For 5 years, newly increased jobs of the country exceeded 60 million, and our social security and healthcare network has covered 1 billion people. We also made important progress in 5-pronged development. China's political, social, cultural, ecological construction have made important headways. The overall confidence and pride of the Chinese people have boosted dramatically. So in general, China's economy scored extraordinary results in a year of extraordinary challenges. We delivered a result that is satisfactory to the people, and that will be remembered by history. And bear in mind, this is a result that we have scored at a time when the world is ravaged by the coronavirus pandemic, and when China faces adverse external environment. So this is truly a hard-won result, and this is a result that we have scored under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, and this is a result of unity and solidarity in China, and this has reflected the advantages of socialism with Chinese characteristics. Next question, please. I'm with China Media Group. In 2020, our GDP exceeded 100 trillion RMB. What does this mean to China, and what significance do you make out of this? Thank you very much for your question. GDP, as I have mentioned earlier, has exceeded 100 trillion RMB. This means China's economic strength, strength in science and technology, and overall national strength has reached a new level. And this is of great significance in building a well-off society and in initiating a new journey of building China into a strong socialist power. Number one, it shows that China's overall national strength has continually increased. In 2020, our GDP reached 101.6 trillion RMB, and this is the first time China's GDP has exceeded 100 trillion RMB. And 20 years ago, we have only surpassed the benchmark of 10 trillion RMB, and in 2020, we exceeded the benchmark of 100 trillion RMB. And over the past 20 years, our GDP has increased by tenfold, and this is truly astonishing. If we look at the compound annual economic growth, in 2020, our GDP could reach $14.7 trillion, and we expect to account for 70% of the world's total GDP. In 2020, for the second consecutive year, we have exceeded the benchmark of $10,000 per capita GDP, and we have narrowed our gap with high-income countries. Second, this also shows that China's technology has advanced dramatically, and we have major results. For example, the Chang'e 5 spacecraft have taken back some soil samples from the Earth. We also have the 500-meter diameter wide FAST, which is a telescope for outer space purposes, and the Striver submersible has reached a depth of more than 10,000 meters. So we could reach the moon, and we could also reach to the sea floor, and this has become a reality. Scientific activities are becoming more and more volatile each and every day, and they are adding impetus to China's economic growth with each passing day. And this shows that China's strength in economy and technology has improved dramatically. And in 2020, our grain output reached a new historic high, and we have been ranking first for several consecutive years. And the added value of the manufacturing industry has been ranking number 1 for 11 consecutive years. Infrastructure has been constantly upgraded, and the total mileage of high-speed railway exceeded 38,000 kilometers, and the number of residents connected to 5G exceeded 200 million, and information and modern business and modern service have continued to increase. China's social productivity has reached a new level, and this has laid also a solid foundation for building a new landscape of development. We are implementing the new development principle of dual circulation, and this will help further tap the potential of domestic consumption. China has the world's largest population. We also have the largest scale of middle class in the world. In 2020, social retails reached 40 trillion RMB, and the eventual consumption exceeded 55 trillion RMB. This will help China to further leverage its advantages of an enormous market scale. We also need to keep in mind that China is the world's largest developing country. Our GDP per capita is still lower than a lot of countries, and there is a big gap with many developed countries, and we are still at the beginning stage of socialism, and there is a wealth gap between the urban areas and the countryside. Innovation is still lagging behind. So we still have a long way to go before we could achieve the long-range targets of building China into a strong socialist power in 2035. Next question, please. I'm with Reuters. In 2020, social retails dropped by 3.9%. In December, it also registered a sluggish growth momentum. Is this related to the pandemic? In 2021, what stimulus packages does the central government have? And how do you expect the investment and foreign trade in 2021? Thank you very much for reading the figure very carefully and raising a question that is very relevant. As you have mentioned, consumption and retails, they play a very basic role in economic performance. Over the past year, consumption and retail, if you look the year as an entity, it has registered a negative growth, but it has turned positive in the third and fourth quarter. In particular, in the fourth quarter, social retails increased by 4.6%. So this is a drastic speed. It's getting close to the normal ranges in previous years, but still we have a gap. But you have seen that in December, total social retails registered some fluctuations. Truly, this has been affected by a couple of elements and factors. And this is related to the pandemic. But if you look at the general picture, consumption and market retails, they have been improving as China steps up with social supplies, and they have been a basic driver for China's economy going forward. In 2021, we have a lot of expectations because this is the middle of January. It's still very early, and China has a number of favorable factors supporting positive economic growth. For China's economy to grow, we have the conditions, we have the resolve and capacity to secure a steady growth. Although China is still in a process of fighting the pandemic, and we face enormous pressure in containing the spread of the disease, but the fundamentals of the Chinese economy hasn't changed. So let me go through some of these favorable conditions. Number one, we have sufficient inventory. Grain output has exceeded 600 billion kilos for 6 consecutive years, and China's infrastructure is very developed, and we have sufficient supply in human resources and labor. So these have helped China to cope with the coronavirus pandemic in 2020 and stabilize China's economic growth. Second, we have a complete network of industries and different sectors. After multiple years of efforts, we have built a very comprehensive network of industries, and we are the only country that has all the sectors registered in the WTO. And we are the largest trading partner of a lot of countries, and over the past year, despite the coronavirus pandemic, our industrial structure has demonstrated strong resilience in 2021. In 2020, facing the pandemic, China has demonstrated strong resilience, and this will be the same going forward in 2021. And China has a vast land. We have a land that is 9.6 million square kilometers. So we have a huge domestic market with enormous domestic consumption, and with the increase of people's income, with the restructuring of the consumption landscape, this will lay further conditions for continuous growth of the economy. In the new year, no matter how the world changes, we will rely fundamentally on the enormous domestic markets. Fourth, we have strong resources and expertise in technology, and China ranks second in the world in terms of scientific and technological investment. And China has already become the largest patent holder of IPs in the world. And bear in mind, we faced enormous challenges in previous years, and in particular in 2020, we faced the significant pressure brought by the COVID-19. But we have managed to optimize our industrial structure, and this will further stimulate the domestic consumption. And a lot of the offline activities have shifted online, and this will generate enormous power for China's economy to further develop. And sixth, China has
积累
a
人才达到2亿人，研发人员的
strong
世界数，
advantage
为我国
in
经济高质量发展提供了源
the
源
number
不
of
断的
laborers, and we have roughly
特别是
900
党
million
坚强领导显著的
laborers
制度优势
aging between 25 and 59, and we also have strong support from the central government level, and we have careful policies made at the central level, and the CPC Central Committee is able to carry out macro control measures, and we are able
精准
to
有效的宏观调控
take
政策
a
是统筹
strategic
经防
look
控
at our
经济
economy,
发展
and we are able to coordinate epidemic prevention and economic development, and this is key
尽
for
管
China
呢近
to
期一些地方疫情是吧
make a success in further
上显
developing our
但
economy.
看对
Although
经济
there is a resurgence of
经济的
some of
影
the
响
cases
是可控的。当
in
前
some
全
regions,
球
but in
新
general,
冠肺炎疫
the
情
risk
扩
is
散蔓延
controllable.
开始
At
人在
present, COVID-19 is still ravaging the
出
planet,
现散发病例
and in recent
乃至
weeks
局部
there are
聚集
some
性疫情，这对经济持续恢复
cases
带来
registered in some regions, and this has brought some uncertainties to our economy.
市场零售的增速也是一个
As you mentioned that in
但总的看
December
我们
social
有条
retail
件有能力
increase
控制
wasn't that significant, and this is clearly
前
related
期
to
疫
the
情防控
pandemic,
啊
but we
积累
have
了
the
丰富经验
confidence
发现疫情
to
的地方
contain the
迅速
spread,
采取
and
行
over
动
the
有
past
力
year
遏
we
制
have
扩
accumulated
散
a lot of
并
experience
行
in
科学
containing
防
the
控
spread of the
手段
infectious
包括
disease.
来打疫苗
We will put in place
有利于控制
effective measures, and this includes
病毒传
vaccination.
播
And this, I
实
believe,
行
is
精细
very
化防控
effective
举
in
措
containing
降低
the
了
spread
对
of the
生产
disease,
生活
and
的
by
影响目
putting in
前
place
大多数地区
precision
生产生活
and
正
targeted
常运转
measures, we are able to stabilize people's livelihood and also economic and
当然
industrial
保持
operation.
经济运行在合理区间呢需要继续
To make sure that our economy can perform within reasonable ranges, we have to make further efforts. As you have mentioned,
消费政策是吧都会按照
you have asked China's investment policy and policies related to consumption.
要求是吧更加
I would like to suggest that you
实施这个财
take reference from the Central Economic Conferences, and China will
消费
practice reasonable and proper
克
policies
服
regarding
前进道路
industries
困难和问题
and regarding our
把这个
macro performance of the economy, and we have the
运行的
confidence to overcome all the difficulties going forward
实现
in order to
持续
make sure that our economy performs within a reasonable scope. Thank you very much. So you have another question that is related to imports and exports.
他那一个基础考的是
你刚才问题里投资消费吧
Did you ask imports and export?
2021年投资和出口情况。
So
2020
the second part of my question is about the imports
2020年
and foreign trade and investment in 2021.
预测这
So
个
this has a
预
lot
测
to
呢
do
主要
with
是国家发改委的事是
predictions, and so
这个
so this
去
is
年呢
mainly the
投资
job and
消
responsibility of
消费
NDRC, and it's not the job of
消费发挥的
China's
积极
National
作
Bureau
用
of Statistics. And
发挥了
last year,
这个关键性的
consumption played a basic role, and investment played a crucial role in
这个全年的
promoting China's economy.
和三次
I
产
have
业的投资
introduced
和社会领域
some of the
都
basic
是
data. For example, investment in the first quarter, in the first industry, second and tertiary industry, all have registered a positive growth.
在新的一年呢，关于投资政策，啊，那还是要继续
In the
发
new
挥
year,
不断
with
满足
respect
作
to
用
investment
发挥
policies,
投
and
资的
we
有
think
效的
we
作
need
用
to
关于这个预算
leverage
投
the
资啊
effective
和这个
role of
地方
investments.
专项债券呢，是吧？这些中央
As for special local government bonds
部署，是吧？这个
and the specific investment policies at different localities, we have
这
made
个啊
general
强弱项
arrangements.
上水平
We have the
发挥应有的
goal of supplementing the weak
进出
links
口呢，去年是逆势
and
增长，
strengthening
因为前两天
the
这个哎
strong areas. imports and exports
专门举办
have
新闻发布会。
performed very well
这个
despite
所以说去年
unfavorable conditions. And a couple of days ago, there was a press release regarding China's foreign trade and imports and exports. Foreign trade was under
另外我刚才
big
介绍
pressure
这些优势是吧？我们的
because
产
of
业
the
体系
COVID-19 pandemic, and I have introduced to you some of our advantages. We have a
就是
comprehensive
畅通的这个
landscape of industries.
满足
We have a very smooth logistics
这样一
system
些国家对于
which
这个
can
防疫产品
guarantee
对于居家生活
the
和办公用品
smooth
的需求，
flow
是
of
吧？所以3、4季度
epidemic prevention related supplies and also livelihood
全年
related supplies. And that is why we managed to have a positive growth in the third quarter. In 2021, the pandemic is still ravaging across the planet, and countries in the world
生产生活用品的需
will continue to have a demand in medical supplies and also
在
in
满足这个内需的
daily necessities,
这个情况下，
while taking a strong footing in developing our domestic consumption.
是吧？
We will have to meet the demand of the external markets, and we will also have to increase our external demand.
希望这个延续
We have
进出口
the
这个
confidence to do that, and we have
你
the
这题目就是
resolve to further sustain the momentum of China's imports and exports. Next question, please.
谢谢主持人，香港紫金杂志记者。请问宁局长，2020
And
年
with
我国
Hong
在
Kong
高质量发展方面进展
economic
如何
news,
有哪些具体
in
表现？在您看来
2020, what are
2021
the
年推
progress
动
China has made
高质
in
量
high
发展
quality
有哪些着
development?
力点？
And in 2021, what are the main areas that we could work on in promoting high quality development?
虽然是由于
Thank
这
you
个
very much for your question. Last
新冠
year,
疫情的影响是吧？这个不仅是对经济增长、对发展的
we
影响
experienced some difficulties brought by the coronavirus
面
pandemic,
对疫情的这个冲击啊，是吧？这个各地区各部门呢，在稳就业、保
but
民生、
different
稳住基
localities
本
and different
盘
regions
经济基本盘的同
and
时呢
sectors have worked
坚定
very
地
hard
贯
to
彻新的
stabilize
发展理念，
the fundamentals of our economy, and we have been implementing new development concepts
持续
and
深化
advancing high quality developments.
培育壮大
we
新动能，
Further deepened reform and cultivated
质
new
量和效益
growth points,
稳步提升。
and the economic growth
一是
quality and
创新的
efficiency
第一
have
动力持续跟进
improved significantly. And the first is that the momentum for development has been further strengthened, and we have some new products and new business forms. And between January and November, strategic new industries have registered an increase of 8.6% in emerging businesses, and this is 1.8% larger than the average.
又进一步比上年提高了4.2个百分点。
Food and other commodities account for 21%, and industrial robots, new energy vehicles, and integrated circuits
高位增长19%，分别为19.1%。
have registered an increase of 19.1%, 17.3%, and 16.2%
高新技术
year
企
on
业
year.
的数量突破了20万家。
We have more than 200,000 enterprises in the field of high-tech
探测
and smart technology. And as I have
第一位的
mentioned, we reached the moon with our
增强。二是协调
rover,
类似
and
的
we
特
also
点日益凸显。
reached
产业结构
to
转
the
型迈出
sea
新
floor,
步伐。
which is
全
more
年
than
装备
10,000
制造业
meters deep. And we also saw important progress in transformative development. And for high-tech industry,
全部
it
规
has
模以
increased
上
by
的
7.1%, and this is 3.8% larger than the average growth of enterprises above designated sizes. And the tertiary industry accounts for 54.5%. This is 1.4 percentage point higher than the previous year.
比上年都增长10%以上，10.6%。
Social and
9%快于
high-tech investments
是吧？7.7%，
increased by
9个百分点。
10.1 and
城乡区域
10.9%
发展的差距
higher than the previous year, and the gap between urban and rural areas has been further narrowed, as I have introduced that the increase of income in the countryside is far significant than the increase of income in urban areas. And we also managed to score positively in environmental protection, and the energy efficiency has improved dramatically. Energy consumption has dropped significantly, and new and renewable energy increased its proportion by 1.2%. Environmental quality has increased significantly, as I have mentioned that there are 257 clear sky days, and the PM 2.5 dropped by 8.3% year on year. And for water quality, according to a survey among 140 countries, and China's high-quality water increased by 3.5%. And in 2020, we celebrated the 40th anniversary for the founding of special economic zones in Shanghai, and the 30th anniversary of Shanghai Pudong new area. And this has stimulated the momentum of economic growth against the sluggish world trade. China's commodities trade and actual utilization of foreign capital have increased dramatically, but we still haven't got the figure of foreign capital utilization of the last month, December. But they have played a significant role in improving China's economy in 2020. And with Belt and Road countries, there is also very active economic and trade connections. And CEP was signed officially, and China has completed its free trade negotiations with the European Union. And this has laid a solid foundation for further growth of our economy going forward. And China has alleviated poverty in some of the regions, and actual poverty has been eradicated in actual terms, and unemployment was also maintained at a reasonable level, and at the worst time it was 6.2%, but throughout the year it was kept at the level of around 5%. Education and culture and public service and utility services have all optimized. And you asked about 2021, this will be the first year of the 14th five-year plan, and the key theme of the 14th five-year plan is high-quality development. High-quality development will be the priority of the CPC Central Committee, and we will be implementing the green development concepts. We will consolidate the results that we have maintained in epidemic prevention, and we aim at creating favorable conditions for high-quality development. We have plans to improve the efficiency of development and also to coordinate the quality and efficiency of economic development, and the high quality as a development concept will be implemented in all sectors of our economy. Next question, please.
Hi, a question from Bloomberg. We have two technical questions. We're wondering what the breakdown is for the contribution to growth from net exports, consumption, and investment. We're also interested in when China's birth rate figures will be released. Thank you.
您好，我是彭博社的记者，有两个比较技术性的问题。第一个就是进出口、消费和投资这三项对于经济增长的推动拉动的比重分别是多少？第二个问题是中国的出生率、人口出生率什么时候能够公布？谢谢。
好，刚才因为讲到这个投资消费，是吧？
So you talked about investment, export, and consumption. Those used to be the three drivers of the Chinese economy, and you asked the question very straightforward. And we have already disclosed figures related to
这是
consumption,
明天
investments,
是吧？
and exports.
数字。那么判断这个三大需求啊对经济的影响啊，我首先
So
向你介绍这个
how
总
will
量
they affect the
第一，
economy?
从总
Let
量
me
上看
first tell you the
，2020
overall
年啊，
volume.
最终消费
in
率
2020.
接近55%，对吧？
The consumption
2011年到
rate reached
2019年，
55%,
我国的消费率
and
平均为53.4%。2020
between 2010 and
尽管受到
2019, this was maintained at an average of 53.4%, and in 2020,
仍然达到
despite the
54.3%，
coronavirus pandemic,
高于资本形成总额
consumption rate reached 55%, so this is
消费仍然是
very significant, and it's kept at a relatively higher
第二呢，
percentage point, and so consumption continues to become a major driver of our economy.
逐季增强的。
And
随着我国
consumption
经
has
济
played
运行稳
a
步恢复，
more
消费对经济增长的拉动力度
significant role in
四季度
driving our
收消费
economy.
零售总额
In the fourth quarter, social retail sales
比三季度
increased by
加快了3.7%。
4.6%. This
最终消费
has
增长
widened by
拉动
3.3%
经济
against the third quarter, and it has contributed to 2.6 percentage point of China's economic growth, and this is widened by 1.2% than the third quarter. With the pandemic becoming contained, and consumption will further recover, and it will further drive China's economy grow further.
对经济
Imports
增
and
长
exports
贡献仍然是
over the past year
衡量
contributed
外
positively
贸
to
啊进
China's
出口啊
China's
对经济
economy.
发展的作用啊
Foreign trade
不
and
能光
imports
看
and
这个增
exports,
长贡献力，这是增量，是吧？刚才又回
we
到
cannot
要
just
看它的
look at
总量，
its
增量它也
contribution
是
to
属于
China's
这个
economy. We have to look also at its overall volume.
从总量上看呢，就是进出口总额
In
相当于
total
GDP 的比重。
terms,
那么中国在各个大国
imports
的
and
是比较
exports
高的，占到30%。
accounts for a very
一个大国
large proportion, more than 30% of China's GDP.
是吧？
Because
实现经济
most of the large
也
countries,
都是在开放的条件下。
the major chunk of their economy is domestic consumption, but in China, foreign trade accounts for more than 30%, and this is a lot higher than the United States and
两
than
个方面来
Japan.
看呢，这个进出口的这
So
个作用
if you look at these two aspects, foreign trade, in particular imports and exports, they played a very significant
那
role.
么经济增长呢，要依靠内需，符合经济的规律。
For economy to grow, we have
构
to
建
rely
了
on
双循环的
domestic
新发展格
consumption.
局啊，需要在开
And we
放
have to
中更
build
好
a
地
new
发挥
landscape
国内超大规
featuring
模市场
dual
的优势，
circulation.
是吧？
We need to further leverage
我国的
China's
情况
huge
看，发
domestic
挥消费
market
基础性作用仍然
in
有
China's
较大的提升空间。
situation, and there is
刚
still
才介
tremendous
绍最终消
room
费支
for
出
further
对
developments
经
in
济
domestic
增长
consumption.
的刚才介
I
绍的总量
introduced how
那
the
么支出的增
eventual
量对增长
consumption
的平均贡
contributed
献
to
力
China's economy,
11年
and
到
the
13
incremental
年到19年在
volume
60%左右。如果要跟这个发达经济体
of
相比
consumption
那还是有，是吧？较大的
between
提升空间
2013 and
一般在
2016
70啊80
was 6%, and compared to
发展的阶段
other
不一样
developed countries, then there is still
所
a
以必须提
large
高居
room
民
of
消费能
development.
力，
So we
完善
have
消费
to
政策改进
improve
对吧？
the
需要提
shopping
高
power of
居民的消费
our
能力，完善
residents
消费政策，改进消费环境，开拓更
and
多的消费
improve
市场
our
发挥
consumption
投资
policy
的关
and
键性作
expand
用
more
也很重要。
growth points for
2020年呢，
consumption.
在促进经
It
济
is
恢
also
复
very important
发
to
挥了积极
focus
作
on
用
investments, and in 2020, investment
下一步
played a
还
very
还要
important role in
加大
recovering our economy. In the next step, we
较
have
高的
to
国民储蓄率，
expand
发挥
effective investments so that we can
同时啊
translate the high saving rate to the result of investments. In the meantime, we need to expand openings and reforms so that we can continue to
你刚才还问到一个
leverage the positive roles played by these
全
three
国啊
major
第
drivers. And
7
you
次
talked
人
about
口
population.
普查
We have just
去年11
completed
月
the
1日
7th nationwide
全面展开
population
700多
census.
普查
And
员
the
呢
census
深
was
入
initiated on July the 1st last year,
城
and
乡
we have 3 million staff
经过
which
几个月的
have gone
努力
to
啊
grassroots, gone to
现在这
communities
个
and
现场登记啊
different districts, and after
今年年
several
初啊
months
正
of
在
efforts,
这
we
个
have
进行啊质量
completed
抽查
the on-site registration,
核实
and in the beginning of this year, we will
过程当中，是吧？
scrutinize some of the quality of the data and
第6次人口普查
demographic survey takes place once in every 10 years. And the sixth demographic survey was conducted in 2010. And I believe that in April we will be able to release the result of the just completed democratic surveys. And we still haven't got the most updated data, so sorry I cannot disclose this data at this point of time. And the fifth plenary session of the 19th CPC National Congress laid out some of the strategies related to population, and there is a 5-year target from the perspective of NBS, National Bureau of Statistics, and we believe we have to come down to a very truthful and reliable and accurate data of democratic figures, and because in so doing we can provide scientific references to policymaking. Next question, please.
谢谢主持人，我是 CNBC 记者提问，然后是
I'm
关于
with CNBC.
对于今年经济的一些
My question is
可能比较考虑到的一些重要的挑战，
related
比如说
related to some of the
看到去年的一
challenges
些
of
消费的一些
economic
情况，然后
growth.
消费可能也
Last
是
year,
在中
I
国
have
的
looked
发展
at
中，
the consumption, and
有些经济学
consumption.
家会希望是占了更
Some
多
of
的有
the
更多的发挥能力，
economists
还
they
有
believe
疫
consumption
情
should
在
play
国
a
内
better
国内或是国
a
外
more
它的蔓
important
延
role.
那就是有很多
The
分析
pandemic
是对各
is
种
still
这些原
ravaging
因会
in
有
China
一些
and
对
in
中
other
国的
countries,
经济
and
去担忧。
some
那
believe
你怎么看
there
呢？
are concerns to the Chinese economy. And what is your comment on this
这
question?
个
Thank you very
面临
much.
全球这个疫情蔓延啊，增强这个风险优
As
化
COVID-19
意识
is
极为
still
重要
ravaging
是吧？我们
across
现在
the
遍观全
planet,
球啊，
we need to be
疫情
mindful about the potential dangers and risks.
反弹是吧
The？coronavirus is taking a second or third swipe in some countries in the world, and there are a lot of uncertainties
这个
in terms of the international
那
and
么
external
国内呢
environment of China's
正像你
development.
刚才所说到的，
If we look
经济恢复的
domestically,
基础
as you have mentioned,
不牢
the
固之处，
fundamentals for China's economic recovery
总的这个指
is
标
still
啊
not stable.
都是这个稳定回升呢，好于预期的啊。
So,
当然
but
也
we
有
have
一些
basically
经济的指标
scored
不是那么
better
有些问题
than
不是短期内是吧？
what we expected, and some of the
这个
issues cannot
都
be
必须
solved
啊这个
within
是吧
a short period of
坚
time.
持稳
So
中
we
求
have
进
to
的工作主基调。
stick to steady developments and moderate progress.
复苏，这个保持在
In so doing,
合
we
理的
can
区间。
recover our economy steadily and make sure that our economy performs
挑战
within
困
a
难
reasonable
是吧
scope
风险的一面，
and
也要
range.
看到
So
机遇啊
we need to be mindful about the
和希望，
challenges and risks, but we also
应该是
have to see that we have more opportunities.
机遇也是前所
So
未有。
the challenge is
这个
unprecedented,
总体上看，
but we also face
机遇
unprecedented
仍然
opportunities.
是大于
So
挑
in
战
general,
是吧
there are more
而且
opportunities than
我们
challenges.
面临的一些新的机遇，当然挑战有
And we
些
face some new opportunities, and of course we have some new
而且从去年的
challenges.
这个宏观调控的和这个企业主体努力的情况看，有些
Last
挑
year,
战
if you look at some of the macro
但
control
战胜
measures,
和转化为机遇。
some of
比如
the
说应对新冠
challenges once overcome,
疫情，它本来是一个
they
很
will
大的挑战。
transform into opportunities. For example, the epidemic
创新啊，
in itself presents a unprecedented challenge,
哎，
but China is committed to
在去年
economic
上半年
growth and
有一些
opening
这个
up
线
and
下实现不
reforms.
了的
And
消费的
in the
走
first
线上走，这是
half of
因为
last
发展的
year,
数字
we have shifted
经
a lot
济啊
of the
是吧？这个
offline
创业
business
创
to
新
online, and
这
so
也这个
this is
各
a
种
innovation
市场主体
with
啊
which we have
它发挥了作用，这变
translated
成了这个
the challenge into
我
opportunity.
们在这些方面刚才介
So
绍的这些
challenges
网
once
上零售
overcome
是吧？包括我
will
们
turn
线上
out
的
to be
教育线上的
opportunities.
医疗
So that is why we have a lot of online education and online healthcare. And if we combine online with
那么全球的
offline,
疫情本
the
来也是个很大的挑战的，是吧？
advantage can be
特别是
further
这个疫情它我们现在外防
expanded.
输入是吧？内防
And
反
right
压
now
力很
we
大
are
你要跟看到现在的例子，还都是从外面
protecting
外面来的，
the
是吧？
virus
但是
from
同时
coming in.
国际上这个疫情的影
And
响
a lot of the cases right now in China come from
它
overseas.
对这个是吧？防
So
疫的
this
产
in
品
itself
包
is
括
a
这个口罩
challenge.
啊这些这个防护服啊，这个还对居
But
家生
in
产
this
办公的
challenge,
用品
we also
甚
have
至
some
这个
opportunities. For
做了
example,
是吧
there is growing demand from overseas in terms of medical supplies and some daily necessities. For example, office-related equipment, computers and
包括
desks
我们有
and chairs. So there's a huge demand from overseas. But China has a very comprehensive
国际上的物流
landscape of industrial sectors, and we also have very smooth and developed logistics systems. So we have every condition to meet the demand from overseas. So this is another example where we have transformed
它不
the
光是这个数字是吧？
challenge
最主要是
into
满足了
opportunity, and that's how we have managed to secure a positive growth of our
救
foreign
命那一
trade.
天了是吧？
So in so doing, we have also
不
met
光
the
是
demand
经
of
济是吧？
people overseas in terms of epidemic prevention. And so this is not just about making money, and this is also about humanitarian assistance. So we put people's life and security at the first place, and this is very important. But in the meantime, we can also translate some of the challenges into opportunities,
要
and in so doing, we could also further develop our economy and improve people's
克
livelihood.
服这个困难，
So we need to
实现
leverage some of the advantages, overcome the difficulties,
这个稳定运行。
steadily, gradually recover our economy
谢谢。
and constantly develop our economy.
不短了，要不我们最后
So it's been a long time.
你念。
How many more questions can we take here?
试牌这个第四的。
Next
谢谢
question,
香港
please.
商报记者提问，请问宁局长
I'm
，2020 年
with
民
Hong
生
Kong
领域
Business
的保障
News.
成效怎么样？然后全国
So
居
in
民人均
2020,
可支配
what
收入
achievements
增
have
长
we
法
made
对此
in
您怎么看？
meeting
另外，
and
城市与农
improving
村不
people's
同收入
livelihood
水平
and
的群体
between
之间
urban
收入有什
and
么变化？
rural areas?
好，
So how do you comment
第一
the
也是
wealth
是
gap?
吧？这个民生是大于天，是最
Thank you
最
very
重要的
much.
这个领域了，是吧？可以说
People's
呢
livelihood
过
is
去一
of
年呢，
paramount importance.
这个是吧？民生的保障是吧？有力
In
有效
2020,
的，是吧？这个
we took effective measures
比较重要
to
的方面嘛，一个
guarantee
是是吧？
livelihood, and there are three very important aspects. The first is
扩大，
employment.
再一个就是
Employment has expanded
价格
in 2020,
那是这个稳定的，是吧？总体稳定的。
and consumer price has been maintained basically stable, and people's income has
价格呢，
continued
我前面
to
介绍了
increase.
这个就业，我前面介绍了不少这个
For
数据
employment, as I have introduced
应该说
some of the
就业
figures
的主要指标
and
是吧
statistics,
是达到了
and you can tell that
预
the
期
major
目标的
parameters
要
of
求
employment
预期
have reached
比如说城镇
or even outperformed our targets. For
人
example,
数啊，这个以前
urban
180
employment
万人呢，是比这个
increased
预期的
by
900万人呢
1.86
还增加了不少，是吧？
million,
这也是在
and this
经
is
济恢复
a lot
是吧和就业有一些
better
政
than
策的支撑
what
下
we have expected. So this is a result
就业率
thanks
和
to
登记
the very
城镇这个
reasonable
调查
and
事业的
scientific
登记事业
employment
都
policies
在预
and
期
the
目标
surveyed and registered unemployment rates in urban areas
优
have
先的政策
both
发
performed
挥了这个作用，
below
而且
the
今年把稳就业、保就业
target
作为
that we set.
宏观调控的
So
首
because
首要
last
目标
year,
是吧这确实是
one of
是
the
吧不仅是各级政府
key tasks of the six guarantees is to guarantee employment. So
再一个就是物价
the central level policy has truly
物价呢
played a very important role. And also, you need to look at consumer
受到这个
price.
多种因素
At the
的
beginning of the
影
year,
响，是吧
due to multiple factors, it was affected very negatively, and the price of pork increased dramatically
各个地方
under the pandemic.
这个有关企业、市
Different
场主体
localities and different enterprises, different market players
增加
worked hand in hand
食品的供
to
应，特别是
step up the supply of food, in particular
流通啊，
pork.
这个和消费的这个保障，是吧？可以说，经过大半年的努力啊，应该是
So
到
after
4季度是吧？这个
a year's
4季度的
effort,
这个
and by the fourth quarter,
纯蓝粒啊、粗蓝粒啊，都得到了这个
inventory
而且我们
peaks
这里还要提，我们
reached
还是加大了这个
a very high
猪肉的
level,
这个
and
进出
I have
口
to tell
是
you
吧
that
进口
we
也保
also
障了国内的这个
expanded the imports of pork,
使得
and this
这个
has helped
猪肉
meet
价格
the
是吧？也四季度
demand of the domestic
虽然
market,
全年
and so
看起
that
来
is
不
why
高是吧？
the pork
这个食
price
品价格
has
它也在这个得到了
turned back a little bit, and
控制成
so
态势，是吧？
in general, the pork price has
我这里讲一个数，猪
reduced
肉价格去
to
年年
a
初
reasonable
涨幅超过
range,
100%。
and at the beginning of the year, pork price increased by more than 100%.
要加上前几年的连续上涨19%个月，那么到了10到12
Bear in
月
mind
份
it has
同比
increased
分
for
别下降
19 consecutive
2.8%、12.5%、
months,
1.3%，是吧？已经现在是，
and by December it's dropped by
这是
1.2% against the
再
same
一个
period
增长
last
重要
year.
的方面，
So
居民收入。
another very
居民
important
收入增长的是
aspect of livelihood
好于预
is
期，实
people's
现了与
income.
经济增长的
People's
基本
income
同步。
performed better than
1到4
expectations,
季
and
度
it has
全国居
maintained
民
a
人
same
均
pace
可
with
支
our
配收入
GDP growth, and
累
from
计
January
的实际
to
增速
December,
啊，我这里
the
介绍一下
actual
是吧？一季度累计
increase
是
of
负
people's
3.9%，
income.
是吧？上半年
So
累计是负
in the first
1.3%，
quarter,
1到3季度累计了就实现了正增长
minus 1.9%, but in the third quarter we managed to register a positive growth of 0.4%. So gradually it's picking up, and throughout the year it has basically maintained the same pace with our GDP growth.
工资和经营收入
Net
回升，是吧？带动了
Net profit
经济增长，是吧？
of
转移净收入
Chinese
反
residents
映了这个
have increased,
保底的
and it has driven China's
上调养
economic
老金的
growth.
退休金标
And
准
for
加大社会
transfer
救济临时救助啊，
income increase, and this is related to
转移
the
净收入
subsidy
全年增长了
policies of the government, and this has helped increase people's income by 8.7%,
增长了7.8%，
and pension increased by
从这当
7.8%,
中得到的收入增长7.8%，社会救济和补助收入增长了
and social
18.7%，
support
政策
and
性
social
生活补
subsidy
贴收入
increased
增长了
by 18.7%, and
这
the
是一个。
social
再一个，保就业的
rescue
政策
fund
促进
increased
了
by
工资收
more
入
than
的回
10%.
升，
And also we have
包括强化
a number
我
of
们就
policies
业
that has
鼓励
increased
农村
the wages.
劳动力
For
外出
example, we
就业
encourage
是吧？去年啊
farmers
全国居民人均工资
seek
性
a
收入
job
比上年增
elsewhere,
长
and
了
last
4.3%，
year
高于整
wage
个居民收入。
income increased by
农民工的月
4.3%
均收入
year
增
on year.
长2.8%，
The
高于
monthly income of
再
migrant
就是
workers
保
increased by
市场主
2.8%,
带动了经营正收入、净收
and
入
we also
由
stabilized
降转升，
market entities,
税费
and
减
this
免、
has
金融
helped
支持政策，
increase
使得
the
居民
income
家
of
庭经
workers,
营状
and
况有所好
the
转。
tax rebates and some of the preferential
全年
policies
全
have
国
also
居民
helped
人均经营
increase
净
some
收
of
入增
the
长了1.6%，
income of our residents.
前3季度这个数还是下降的，是吧？受到疫情
And in the first 3 quarters, people's income
二是
dropped,
城
but
乡区
throughout the
域
year it
和
has
不同
increased
群
by
体收入差距
1.1%.
是吧？有所改善。城乡居民
The
收入
wealth
差
gap
距继续
between
缩小
urban and rural
还有
areas
不见
also
的数，是吧？城乡居民人均
narrowed,
可支配收入
and the figure
2.56
was already
上面缩小
introduced by me earlier, and the gap was reduced by 2.6%. In central and western area of China, the income increase outpaced that of the eastern area, and in the east it's 4.6%, in the central place of China it's 4.3%, in the west 4.6%. In northeastern part of China, 3.3%. So in general, central and western part of China have a income increase that is faster than China's eastern provinces. The low-income group had a income increase higher than China's average. The low-income group had a income increase of 6.6%, in which the low-income group of residents living in the countryside saw an increase of 9.8%, and this is 5.1% higher than national average. So in terms of employment, consumer price, and people's income, we have come to the conclusion that livelihood has been maintained very well, and the policies in 2020 have been very effective, and we have scored very positive results. And going forward, we will continue to stabilize our economy and recover our economy. We will continue to give strong support to low-income groups and consolidate our efforts in stabilizing the operation of market entities and market players by engaging in institutional reforms. We aim at further narrowing the wealth gap between urban and rural areas. Next question, please.
谢谢主持人。中国日报记者提问，请问
Thank you
宁
very
局长
much. I'm with
，2020
China
年
Daily.
3次产业均实现正增长，出
In
现了哪些新情况和新特点？
all the three
四季度工业
industries
生产
have
是否也
registered
得到
a
正常
positive
体
growth.
现？
And what are the new features? And in the fourth quarter, have we normalized the growth curve of different industries? Thank you very much for your question. In 2020,
经过这个全国上下的努力啊，不仅是实现了这个总体经济增长的
united efforts from all across the country, we have managed to achieve positive economic growth.
也都实现了协同的恢复发展。
All the three industries have coordinated their steps of growth, and all have registered a positive growth after registering a negative growth in the
企
first
业
quarter.
复工复产、复商复市的水平啊，全年看是稳步提升，
Reopening of
三次产业
enterprises
的
have
对吧运
steadily
行啊逐步改善的。
carried out with
目
each
前
passing
这个
month.
三次产业的各个大类行业中啊，这个大多数
If you look
实
at
现
the
了
major categories
一
of
是
the
农
three
业基础地位
industries,
更
most of
加
them
稳
have
固
registered a positive growth,
过
and
去一
China
年
has further
农业生
consolidated
产客
its
户
advantage
中
in agriculture.
农药
And
灾害
over
影响
the past
粮
year,
食生产再获
we
复
have
生猪产
overcome
快速恢
the
复
challenges brought by
禽蛋
the
奶
COVID-19
产量
and
稳
the
定增
big
长，农业
flood,
生产好
and
于
the
预期
agriculture industry managed to
全
overcome
年
the
农林牧渔
challenges
业的
of
增加值
pork
同比
price
增长
increase
3%，
and the added value of
这个从
agriculture
历年
and
看
forestry
3%
increased by
在农业
1.3% year on year.
比较好的
So
这个增速，
this is
这个
a
分季度
very
看
fast
还是负增长的，
growth.
是吧？负
And
3.2%。
the first quarter, we had the negative growth. In the second, third, and fourth quarter, we had an increase of 3.3 and 3.9 and 4.1%. So that is why
现代农业发展
throughout the year we had an increase of 3.1, and modern agriculture also developed very
这是
well, and we
二
had
是工业生产企稳回升，
produced
工
some
业特
new
别是制造业总体呈现
breed
稳
of
步恢
rice,
复，逐
and
季回
for
升的
manufacturing
态势。
industry, which has
2020 年
gradually
规模以
stabilized
上工业增加值
in
上年
2020,
增
and in
长
2020,
2.8%，
the
其中
added
制造
value
业
of
增长
enterprises above
3.4%，
designated
制造业快
charges increased by 2.8%,
分季
but
度看
the
规模以
manufacturing
上工
industry
业增加
increased by
值
3.4%.
1、2、3、4季度同比分别
And
增长
in the
4%，
first, second,
负
third,
的
and
8.4
fourth quarter,
季度跌得很深了。
it's registered an increase of
因为时间的关系，我
-0.8%.
们发布会的直播到此告一段落，感谢您的收看，再会。